intelligence that made her blood run cold. What Karen didn't know was that 3 minutes earlier, she had just destroyed the life of the one person who could have saved her from what was about to unfold. The sirens were already wailing in the distance, but they weren't coming for the Camel. Marcus Rivera had been staring at his laptop screen for 3 hours straight, the cursor blinking mockingly at the end of an unfinished sentence. His freelance writing career was barely keeping him afloat, and the latest rejection email sat open in another tab like a digital slap across the face. The modest ranch house he'd inherited from his grandmother felt more like a prison these days too. Quiet, too empty, too full of memories he wasn't ready to process. The sound of splashing water made him look up from his kitchen table. Through the window, he could see his backyard pool, the one luxury his grandmother had insisted on installing, despite the expense. The crystal blue water sparkled in the late morning sun, creating dancing patterns of light across the patio stones. But there was someone in it. Marcus blinked hard, certain he was hallucinating from too much caffeine and too little sleep. A woman floated on an inflatable unicorn in the center of his pool, her bleached blonde hair fanned out like a crown around her head. She wore a hot pink bikini that looked expensive, and oversized sunglasses that probably cost more than his monthly grocery budget. What the hell? Marcus muttered, pushing back from the table so quickly his chair scraped against the tiles. By the time he reached his back door, the woman had noticed him. She didn't seem startled or embarrassed. Instead, she lowered her sunglasses and gave him a look that could have frozen lava. Finally, she called out, her voice carrying the brand of entitlement that came with too much money and too little accountability. I was wondering when you'd notice. Your pool maintenance is terrible, the pH is completely off. Marcus stepped onto his patio, his bare feet hitting the warm stones. Excuse me, but what are you doing in my pool? The woman, who looked to be in her early 40s with the kind of artificial perfection that screamed expensive cosmetic procedures, let out a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. Your pool, honey? I think there's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding here is you thinking you can just waltz into someone's backyard and someone's backyard. She sat up on the unicorn float, water dripping from her surgically enhanced figure. This is community property. The HOA made it very clear when they sent the notice. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. What notice? Oh, you poor thing. Her smile was pure venom wrapped in saccharine sweetness. You didn't get the certified letter. How embarrassing. Your property taxes are 3 months behind. Sweetie, this house, this pool, it's all been transferred to community management until you can pay up. I'm Karen Whitmore, HOA president, and I'm here to oversee the transition. That's impossible. Marcus's voice came out strangled. I pay my taxes. I pay them but even as he said it, he remembered the stack of unopened mail on his counter, the bills he'd been avoiding since his last big client had ghosted him without payment. Karen climbed off the float with practiced grace, water cascading off her tanned skin. The community voted, we need this pool for our summer events. Your little property here is going to make a lovely community center once we're done with renovations. You can't just take someone's house. Marcus stepped closer to the pool's edge, his hands clenched into fists. Oh, but we can. Karen waded toward the shallow end, her movements deliberate and predatory. 3 months of unpaid property taxes, violation of HOA landscaping standards, and SHE paused dramatically, failure to maintain community aesthetic standards. Your grass is half an inch too long, your fence needs painting, and don't even get me started on that rusty mailbox. Marcus's grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. Mijo, never trust people who smile while they're stabbing you in the back. Karen's smile was all teeth and no warmth. Those are bogus charges and you know it. Are they? Karen reached the pool steps and began climbing out, each movement calculated to assert dominance. Because I have photos, timestamps, witness statements from concerned neighbors who've been complaining about your ... declining standards. Water pooled around her feet as she stood on his patio, invading his space with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. Face it, honey, you're in over your head. Literally and figuratively. Marcus pulled out his phone with shaking hands. I'm calling the police. Go ahead. Karen picked up a designer towel from a chair Marcus didn't recognize had she brought her own furniture. Officer Martinez is my brother-in-law. Lovely man. Very understanding about community property disputes. The phone felt heavy in Marcus's hands. This couldn't be happening. This was his grandmother's house, his sanctuary, his last connection to the woman who'd raised him after his parents died. The pool where she'd taught him to swim, where they'd had countless conversations about life and dreams and the future that now seemed to be crumbling around him. There has to be a legal process, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Karen began drying herself with theatrical slowness. You missed it. All those certified letters you ignored, the court dates you failed to appear for, the community meetings where we discussed your ... situation. She shrugged with false sympathy. Ignorance isn't a defense, sweetie. Marcus felt the walls of his world closing in. How long do I have to move out? Karen's laugh was like nails on a chalkboard. Oh, honey, you don't understand. You're not moving out. You're being evicted. Today the sheriff will be here at 2 o'clock to supervise your removal. She checked a diamond-encrusted watch. That gives you about 3 hours to pack whatever fits in your car. Everything else becomes community property. Her eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction, including that adorable little writing desk by the window. It'll look perfect in my home office. You've been watching me. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. Research. Honey, know your enemy. Karen wrapped the towel around herself like armor. Did you really think you could hide behind those closed curtains forever? Crying into your laptop? Ordering takeout every night? Letting this beautiful property go to waste? The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. This wasn't just about property taxes or HOA violations. This was personal, predatory, a calculated destruction of someone's life for sport. Why? Marcus's voice cracked. Why me? Why this house? Karen's smile widened, revealing teeth that were too white, too perfect. Because I can. Because people like you think you're entitled to things you can't afford. Because this neighborhood needs to maintain standards. And you, she gestured dismissively at his worn t-shirt and faded jeans. You lower the property values just by existing. Something snapped inside Marcus. The grief he'd been carrying, the financial stress, the isolation, the feeling of drowning in a world that seemed designed to crush people like him, it all crystallized into pure white-hot rage. Get out of my pool, he said quietly. Excuse me. Get out of my pool. The words exploded from him with such force that Karen actually took a step back. But her recovery was swift, and when she smiled again, it was the smile of a predator who'd just realized her prey was finally ready to fight. There's the fire I was looking for. Too bad it's 3 months too late. She sauntered toward the gate that led to the front yard, her wet feet leaving prints on the concrete. I'll be back at 2 with the sheriff. Have your things ready, or they'll be waiting on the curb for the garbage truck. The gate swung shut behind her with a metallic clang that sounded like a death knell. Marcus stood alone in his backyard, staring at the pool where a stranger's unicorn float still bobbed in the water like a neon pink insult. His phone buzzed with a text message. Final notice. Property seizure authorized. Evacuation. 2 p.m. today. He sank into one of the patio chairs, his legs suddenly unable to support him. In 3 hours, he would lose everything. His home, his grandmother's memory, his last anchor to stability. Karen Whitmore hadn't just invaded his pool. She'd invaded his life, his peace, his future. But as Marcus sat there, drowning in despair, he didn't notice the subtle tremor in the ground beneath his feet. He didn't see the section of fence behind the oleander bushes beginning to sag inward. And he definitely didn't hear the soft, rhythmic footsteps approaching from the desert preserve that bordered his property. Because 3 miles away, at the Desert Sanctuary Wildlife Preserve, a security alarm was about to go off, and the staff was about to discover that their most prized residents, a rescued Arabian camel named Scheherazade, who had once belonged to a circus and had very strong opinions about people who mistreated others, was no longer in her enclosure. The hole in the fence was exactly camel size, and the trail of hoofprints led directly toward the suburban neighborhood where Karen Whitmore was currently celebrating her victory with a glass of champagne on her own perfectly manicured patio. Marcus buried his face in his hands, unaware that justice was about to arrive on 4 legs, standing 7 feet tall, and carrying the weight of karma on her humped back. Marcus stared at his phone screen, scrolling through 3 months of missed calls from the county tax office. The numbers swam before his eyes. $8,347.62 in back taxes, plus penalties, plus fees that seemed to multiply like cancer cells. His grandmother's modest savings account, the one he'd been living off since her death, showed a balance of $1,200. How had he let it get this bad? The answer sat in his email inbox. 17 consecutive client rejections, 3 canceled contracts, and a publishing deal that had evaporated when his editor was laid off. He'd been so paralyzed by grief and failure that he'd stopped opening official mail, stopped answering unknown numbers, stopped engaging with the world beyond his laptop screen. Now Karen Whitmore owned his life. Marcus pushed himself out of the chair and walked to the fence line where his grandmother's prized rose bushes grew in wild abundance. She'd planted them the year he'd moved in with her, aged 10 and hollow-eyed from losing his parents in a car accident. Roses need deep roots, mijo, she'd told him, her weathered hands gentle on his shoulders. Just like people. The deeper the roots, the stronger they grow. The roses were still blooming, their red petals defiant against the morning heat. But behind them, the wooden fence sagged inward, several boards hanging loose like broken teeth. Strange, his grandmother had always kept the fence in perfect repair. Marcus pushed through the rose bushes, thorns catching on his shirt, and examined the damage. The boards hadn't rotted or weathered, they'd been pushed inward with tremendous force, leaving splintered wood and bent nails scattered on the ground. A massive hoofprint in the soft earth made him freeze. The print was perfectly preserved in the sandy soil, easily twice the size of a horse's hoof, and perfectly round. Marcus knelt beside it, his writer's mind cataloging details. The depth suggested incredible weight. The shape was unlike anything he'd seen before, and there were more prints leading away from the fence toward the house. What the hell kind of animal? Double quotes, he whispered, then stopped. because he could hear Karen's voice carrying across the neighborhood, high and sharp with authority. She was on her phone, probably coordinating his destruction with military precision. Marcus followed the hoofprints across his yard, his pulse quickening with each step. They led directly to his pool area, where the unicorn floats still bobbed obscenely in the chlorinated water. But something else caught his attention: muddy water along the pool's edge, as if a large animal had stopped for a drink. His phone rang, making him jump. Unknown number. Hello, Marcus Rivera. The voice was professional, crisp. This is Dr. Sarah Chen from Desert Sanctuary Wildlife Preserve. I'm calling because we have a situation that might affect your neighborhood. A situation. One of our residents has gone missing. A 7-foot Arabian camel named Scheherazade. She's not dangerous to humans, but she has strong opinions about people who mistreat others. We've been tracking her movement, and GPS shows she's heading toward your area. Marcus stared at the hoofprints. How long has she been missing? About 4 hours. We think she broke through her enclosure around 8 a.m. Mr. Rivera, if you see her, please don't approach. Call us immediately. Scheherazade has a history of intervention when she witnesses injustice. Intervention. Dr. Chen's voice carried a note of embarrassment. She was a circus camel before we rescued her, trained to perform, but also to protect her handlers from aggressive audience members. She has an uncanny ability to sense when someone is being bullied or threatened, and she responds accordingly. The hoofprints led from the pool toward the front of the house. Marcus followed them, his heart hammering against his ribs. Dr. Chen, what kind of response are we talking about? Let's just say her previous owner called her his karma camel. She has a perfect record of targeting people who deserve it. Marcus reached his front yard just as a black SUV pulled into his driveway. Karen Whitmore emerged from the passenger side, followed by a man in a sheriff's uniform who looked uncomfortable and tired. Behind them, a moving truck rumbled to a stop at the curb. Mr. Rivera? Dr. Chen's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you still there? Yeah, Marcus whispered, watching Karen stride toward his front door like she owned the play switch. Apparently, she did. I think your camel is about to make an appearance. Karen spotted him and waved with mock cheerfulness. Yoo-hoo, Marcus. Hope you're all packed up, sweetie. Time's up. The sheriff, a heavy-set man with kind eyes who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, approached Marcus with obvious reluctance. Sir, I'm Deputy Rodriguez. I have a court order for immediate eviction. I'm real sorry about this. Marcus could see the genuine regret in the man's face. This is really happening. Afraid so. Property taxes, HOA violations, community seizure order. Rodriguez shuffled through papers that looked official and damning. You've got 30 minutes to grab personal belongings only. Everything else stays. Karen's laugh cut through the morning, air like a blade. Don't look so glum, Marcus. Think of it as a fresh start. Sometimes people need a good kick in the pants to get their lives together. She was enjoying this. Every second of his humiliation was feeding something dark and hungry inside her. Mrs. Whitmore, Deputy Rodriguez said carefully, maybe we could give Mr. Rivera a little more time too? Absolutely not. Karen's voice turned arctic. The law is the law, Deputy, and the community has rights too. We can't have squatters dragging down property values. Squatters. Marcus felt rage building in his chest like a pressure cooker. This is my grandmother's house. I grew up here. I've been paying rent too. He stopped, realizing how pathetic he sounded. To who? Karen's smile was pure triumph. Because according to county records, no rent payments have been received for this property in 6 months. Which, coincidentally, is how long the HOA has been managing the estate of one Isabella Rivera, deceased. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. You've been intercepting my payments. Managing them, Karen corrected. The HOA has been acting as a state executor since your grandmother failed to update her will before her death. Every penny you thought you were paying in rent has been going into a community development fund. That's theft. That's legal estate management. Sweetie, maybe if you'd attended the probate hearings instead of hiding in your little writing cave, you'd have known. Deputy Rodriguez cleared his throat uncomfortably. Ma'am, maybe we should let Mr. Rivera call a lawyer before the ground began to tremble. At first, Marcus thought it was an earthquake, not uncommon in their part of California. But the tremor was rhythmic, steady, like the footsteps of something massive approaching with purpose. Karen frowned, looking around the quiet, suburban street. What's that noise? The trembling intensified. Car alarms began going off in the distance. A neighbor's dog started barking frantically. Then she appeared. Scheherazade rounded the corner at the end of the street like something out of a desert mirage. 7 feet of sand-colored fury, her single hump swaying with each purposeful step. Her dark eyes locked on the scene unfolding in Marcus's front yard. Holy shit. Deputy Rodriguez breathed, his hand instinctively moving to his radio. Karen turned and froze, her face going chalk white. Is that? Is that a camel? The magnificent animal approached with the measured dignity of royalty, surveying her kingdom. Her coat gleamed golden in the morning sun, and her expression carried the weight of ancient wisdom and barely contained rage. Marcus's phone buzzed. With a text from Dr. Chen. GPS shows Scheherazade at your location. Whatever's happening, don't interfere. She knows what she's doing. Scheherazade stopped 20 feet away and studied the group with intelligence that was almost human. Her gaze swept over Deputy Rodriguez, who stepped carefully aside, passed over Marcus with what looked like sympathy, and settled on Karen with the intensity of a laser. Nice camel, Karen said in a voice that had climbed 3 octaves. Pretty camel. Good camel. Scheherazade's response was to fix Karen with a stare that could have melted steel. Maybe we should call animal control, Deputy Rodriguez suggested, reaching for his radio. No. The word came out of Marcus with surprising force. Something about the camel's presence filled him with a strange calm, as if the universe had finally decided to balance the scales. Let's see what happens. Karen shot him a look of pure venom. You planned this. You called some kind of exotic animal service to intimidate me. Scheherazade took a step forward. Just one step, but the ground shook with the weight of inevitability. I didn't plan anything, Marcus said quietly, but I'm starting to think someone else did. The camel's eyes never left Karen's face. There was something profound in that gaze, something that suggested she understood exactly what was happening and had strong opinions about it. Karen backed toward the SUV, her designer heels clicking nervously on the asphalt. This is ridiculous. Deputy, arrest this man for ... for something. Public endangerment, illegal animal harboring. Ma'am, I don't think the camel belongs to him. Then whose is it? Dr. Chen's voice echoed in Marcus's memory. She has a perfect record of targeting people who deserve it. Scheherazade took another step forward, and Karen stumbled backward, her face now the color of curdled milk. Stay back. Karen shrieked. I'm warning you. I have connections. I have lawyers. Karen's breath came in short, panicked gasps as she pressed herself against the SUV's passenger door. The metal was hot against her back, but not as hot as the rage burning in Scheherazade's ancient eyes. Deputy, Karen's voice cracked like breaking porcelain. Do something. Rodriguez had his radio halfway to his mouth when Scheherazade turned her massive head toward him. The look she gave him wasn't threatening. It was almost gentle, like a teacher asking a student to please step aside. While she handled a discipline problem, the deputy slowly lowered his radio. Ma'am, I think we should let this play out. What? Karen's screech could have shattered windows. That thing could kill me. Marcus found himself speaking with a clarity he hadn't felt in months. She's not going to kill you, Karen, but I think she's going to show you something about consequences. Scheherazade began to circle Karen with the patience of a predator who had all the time in the world. Her hooves clicked against the asphalt with the rhythm of a ticking clock. Each step measured and deliberate. Karen tried to edge around the SUV toward the driver's side, but every move she made, Scheherazade countered, hurting her with the skill of an animal who had spent years reading human behavior. This is insane, Karen whimpered. I'm calling my lawyer. I'm calling the mayor. I'm calling. Scheherazade stopped directly in front of her, and did something that made everyone present freeze in absolute shock. She smiled, not a human smile, but the unmistakable expression of a creature who had just figured out the perfect way to deliver justice. Her lips pulled back to reveal massive yellow teeth, and her eyes crinkled with what could only be described as malicious glee. Oh God, Karen whispered. What is it doing? Marcus's phone buzzed again. Dr. Chen's voice was breathless when he answered. Mr. Rivera, we've been monitoring Scheherazade's GPS. She's stationary at your location. Is everyone safe? Define safe, Marcus said, unable to look away from the standoff. She hasn't hurt anyone, has she? Not yet, but she's definitely planning something. That's actually normal for her. When she was with the circus, she had a routine where she would publicly humiliate cruel audience members. The ringmaster called it Scheherazade's justice. She would... Dr. Chen's voice cut off abruptly. Dr. Chen, what would she do? Mr. Rivera, you need to get that woman away from any source of water. Immediately. Marcus looked at Karen, still trapped against the SUV, then at his house behind him, at the pool in his backyard, at the sprinkler system that watered the front lawn every morning at precisely 11 a.m. His watch read 10:58. Karen, Marcus said slowly, you need to get in the car. Right now. Why? What's happening? But Karen's voice held a note of growing terror, as if some primal part of her brain was recognizing the setup. Scheherazade backed away from the SUV, not retreating, but positioning herself like a chess master, who had just achieved checkmate in 3 moves. Dr. Chen, what exactly did she do to people at the circus? She would wait until they were near water. Then, well, let's just say camels can spit with remarkable accuracy and force. But Scheherazade's signature move was something different. The sprinkler system activated with a mechanical thunk. 20 jets of water erupted across Marcus's front lawn, creating a rainbow mist in the morning sunlight. Karen looked around in confusion as droplets began to settle on her designer outfit. Scheherazade's smile widened. No, Karen breathed, finally understanding. No, you disgusting animal. Don't you dare. What happened next would be talked about in the neighborhood for decades. Scheherazade reared up on her hind legs, her 7-foot frame becoming 9 feet of righteous fury, and then came down. With all four hooves directly on the main water line that fed the sprinkler system, the pipe exploded. A geyser of water erupted from the ground like a suburban Old Faithful, shooting 30 feet into the air before crashing down in a deluge that soaked everything within a 20-foot radius. Karen, who had been standing directly in the blast zone, was instantly transformed from perfectly coiffed HOA president to a drowned rat in designer clothing, her bleached hair plastered to her skull, her makeup running in dark rivers down her cheeks, her pink bikini visible through her no-transparent white blouse. But Scheherazade wasn't finished. The camel positioned herself upwind of the water fountain, and did something that defied the laws of physics and good taste. She gathered herself, tilted her head back, and produced a sound that was part roar, part laugh, and part victory celebration. Then she spit. Not the polite expectoration of a normal animal, but a projectile stream of camel saliva mixed with partially digested grass that hit Karen square in the chest with the force of a water balloon launched from a cannon. Karen screamed a sound of pure, primal outrage that echoed off every house on the block. She stumbled backward, slipped on the wet asphalt, and went down hard, landing directly in a puddle that was rapidly turning into a lake. Deputy Rodriguez stood frozen, his mouth hanging open, as Karen flailed in the muddy water like an overturned beetle. "Help me," she shrieked at the deputy. "Arrest that thing. Arrest him. Arrest somebody." But Rodriguez was laughing, actually laughing, his whole body shaking with barely contained mirth. "Ma'am, I don't think I can arrest a camel for whatever this is." Scheherazade walked over to where Karen lay sprawled in the mud and looked down at her with the satisfied expression of a job well done. Then, with perfect timing, she lifted her tail and deposited a steaming pile of camel dung directly beside Karen's head. The message was clear. "This is what I think of you." Karen's scream could have wakened the dead. Marcus felt something break loose inside his chestnuts of grief and rage and helplessness, transforming into pure, cleansing laughter. He laughed until tears ran down his face, until his sides ached, until he had to lean against his mailbox for support. "You think this is funny?" Karen struggled to her feet, slipping and sliding in the mud. Her perfectly constructed facade had completely dissolved, revealing the ugly core beneath. "You think destroying someone's life is entertaining?" "Destroying someone's life?" Marcus wiped his eyes, his laughter dying as the irony hit him. "Karen, what exactly do you think you've been doing to me?" She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Because in that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of her dignity, she finally understood what she looked like to the rest of the world. Scheherazade gave Karen one final contemptuous look, then walked over to Marcus and gently nuzzled his shoulder with her massive head. The gesture was unmistakably protective, claiming him as someone under her care. "Good girl," Marcus whispered, scratching behind her ears. "Thank you." The sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Multiple vehicles. "Coming fast?" Deputy Rodriguez checked his radio with obvious reluctance. "Dispatch. This is Rodriguez. We've got a situation at 1247 Maple Drive. I'm going to need animal control, a supervisor, and maybe a lawyer." "Copy that, Rodriguez. What's the nature of the emergency?" Rodriguez looked at Karen, still dripping and furious in the mud, then at Scheherazade, who was now peacefully grazing on Marcus's grandmother's roses. "Well, dispatch, it appears a camel has just delivered a very thorough lesson in karma." 3 black SUVs screeched around the corner, followed by an animal control truck, and what looked like half the sheriff's department. But leading the convoy was a sleek sedan that Marcus didn't recognize, until he saw the woman who stepped out of it. She was tall, elegant, with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded immediate attention. She wore a perfectly tailored business suit and carried herself like someone who had never lost a battle in her life. Karen's face went dead white. "Isabella," she whispered. "Hello, Karen." The woman's voice was crisp, educated, and absolutely merciless. "I hear you've been having some fun with my nephew's property." Marcus stared at her in shock. "Aunt Isabella, but your grandmother said you were ... dead." Isabella Rivera smiled, and it was a smile that could have launched warships. "That was a slight exaggeration, mijo. I've been in Europe, closing a rather complicated business deal. I only learned about Elena's death and your ... difficulties when my lawyers finally tracked me down last week." She walked over to Karen, her heels clicking with authority. "Imagine my surprise when I discovered that someone had been impersonating an estate executor, intercepting legal documents, and defrauding my family." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "The real question," Isabella continued, "is whether you'd prefer to discuss this matter with my attorneys, or with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, because what you've done, Karen, isn't just theft. It's mail fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny." The sirens were getting closer, and Marcus could see the flashing lights reflecting off windows down the street. Karen looked around desperately at Deputy Rodriguez, who was suddenly very interested in his paperwork. At the approaching police cars, at Scheherazade, who was watching her with the satisfied expression of a creature who had just balanced the scales of justice. The circus that descended on Maple Drive made the morning's earlier chaos look like a quiet tea party, FBI agents in dark suits emerged from unmarked vehicles, their faces grim with the satisfaction of federal investigators who had just landed. A big fish. Animal control officers approached Scheherazade with the reverence usually reserved for visiting dignitaries, while Dr. Chen climbed out of the wildlife preserve van with a mixture of pride and exasperation. But it was the news vans that truly announced Karen's downfall. Channel 7, Channel 12. The local cable station, someone had tipped off the media that a federal fraud case was breaking in suburbia, complete with a heroic camel and a villain who looked like she'd been dunked in a septic tank. Karen stood in the expanding lake of water from the broken sprinkler line, her designer outfit clinging to her like a second skin, mascara streaking down her cheeks in gothic rivers. She looked around wildly as reporters began setting up cameras, as if she could somehow escape the gravitational pull of consequences that was dragging her down. Aunt Isabella, Marcus said, still trying to process the woman's miraculous resurrection. How are you even here? Grandmother said you died in a car accident in Spain 5 years ago. Isabella's laugh was like silver bells dipped in acid. Your grandmother said a lot of things, mijo. We had a philosophical disagreement about how to handle the family estate. I thought it was better to let everyone believe I was dead, rather than fight her for control of properties that meant more to her than they did to me. She gestured at the house behind them, at the roses still blooming despite the chaos. Alina earned this place. She deserved to live here in peace. But I made sure my lawyers kept an eye on things, just in case. Just in case? What? Just in case? Vultures like Karen decided to circle a grieving family member who was too lost in his own pain to protect himself. The words hit Marcus like a slap, but not an unkind one. His aunt was right, he had been lost, paralyzed by grief and failure, until he'd become easy prey for predators like Karen, Special Agent Morrison, a woman with steel-gray hair and the bearing of someone who had seen every type of human scum imaginable, approached Karen with the slow, deliberate pace of a hunter who had cornered her quarry. Karen Elizabeth Whitmore, she announced in a voice that carried across the entire neighborhood. You're under arrest for mail fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit grand larceny, and violation of federal racketeering statutes. This is ridiculous. Karen's voice had climbed to a frequency that probably hurt dogs 3 blocks away. I was acting as a legitimate estate executor. I have documentation. Yes, you do. Agent Morrison smiled with all the warmth of an Arctic winter. Forged documentation, created with a printer registered to your home address, signed with a notary stamp that was reported stolen from the county clerk's office 6 months ago. Karen's face cycled through several shades of white before settling on the color of old bone. That's impossible. I never— Ma'am, we have surveillance footage of you entering the courthouse after hours using a keycard that belonged to your brother-in-law, Officer Martinez. We have records of you accessing probate files for 17 different estates, and we have bank records showing deposits of intercepted payments into accounts you established using forged executor credentials. The FBI agent's voice never changed tone, but each word hit like a hammer blow. This isn't your first victim, Mrs. Whitmore. You've been running this scam for over 2 years. Marcus felt the world tilt sideways. 17 estates, 17 families, Agent Morrison confirmed. All of them people who lost loved ones and were too overwhelmed by grief to properly monitor estate proceedings. Mrs. Whitmore identified vulnerable targets, forged executor documents, and systematically stole everything from property to insurance payouts. Isabella placed a protective hand on Marcus's shoulder, which is why I had my lawyers monitor Elena's estate after her death. When they discovered the irregularities, they contacted the FBI. You've been investigating this for months. Marcus stared at his aunt with new understanding. We've been building a case, Agent Morrison answered. Mr. Rivera, your situation was the final piece we needed. Mrs. Whitmore got careless because she thought you were completely isolated, with no family to protect you. Karen backed away from the advancing FBI agent, her heels squelching in the mud. This is entrapment. You used him as bait. No, Isabella's voice cut through Karen's protests like a blade. We protected him. Do you know what your real mistake was, Karen? Karen said nothing, but her eyes darted around like a trapped animal looking for an escape route. Your real mistake was thinking that a Rivera dies quietly, without leaving anyone behind to seek justice. Isabella's smile was beautiful, and terrible. My family has survived poverty, discrimination, and people like you for generations. We don't go down without a fight. Dr. Chen had been quietly approaching Scheherazade during the arrests, and now she stood beside the camel with obvious affection. I have to ask, she called out to the assembled crowd. How did Scheherazade know to come here? Come here. Isabella raised an eyebrow. Camels are incredibly intelligent, Dr. Chen explained, but Scheherazade broke out of a secure enclosure and traveled 3 miles through suburban neighborhoods to arrive at exactly the right moment. That's not coincidence. Marcus looked at Scheherazade, who was now peacefully munching on his grandmother's roses as if she owned the place. Dr. Chen, you said she was trained to protect people from bullies. Yes, and you said she could sense injustice. Dr. Chen nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. Marcus walked over to Scheherazade and gently stroked her neck. The camel turned her massive head toward him, and in her dark eyes he saw something that made his breath catch. Recognition? You knew my grandmother, didn't you? He whispered. Scheherazade's response was to nuzzle his cheek with surprising gentleness. Dr. Chen gasped. That's impossible. We've had Scheherazade for 5 years, and she's never left the preserve except for medical visits to the veterinary clinic in town. What veterinary clinic? Isabella asked sharply. Desert Animal Care? Dr. Patricia Vasquez runs it. She's been Scheherazade's vet since we rescued her. Marcus and Isabella exchanged glances. Dr. Patricia Vasquez had been Elena Rivera's closest friend for 40 years. She'd been at the house countless times, had helped care for Elena during her final illness, had been one of the few people Elena trusted completely, she told her, Marcus said with absolute certainty. Somehow, Dr. Vasquez told Scheherazade about what was happening here. It sounded insane, but as Marcus spoke the words, he knew they were true. His grandmother's best friend had enlisted a 7-foot camel in a mission of justice that would have made Elena proud. Agent Morrison was reading Karen her rights when the first news crew went live. The reporter, a perky blonde who looked like she'd rather be covering a flower show, was gamely trying to make sense of the scene. This is Channel 7 News, reporting from a quiet suburban neighborhood where a federal fraud investigation has culminated in what can only be described as the most unusual arrest in recent memory. A local woman who allegedly ran a multi-million-dollar estate fraud scheme has been taken into custody after being, well, there's no other way to say this, humiliated by a camel. Karen's mugshot was going to be spectacular. Hair plastered to her skull, makeup streaked down her face, covered in mud and camel spit, she looked like she'd been dragged behind a pickup truck through a swamp. Mrs. Whitmore, Agent Morrison continued, you have the right to remain silent. Though given the circumstances, I suspect you'll want to call a very good lawyer. As if summoned by the mention of legal representation, a black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. The man who emerged wore a suit that probably cost more than Marcus's car, and his expression suggested he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Richard Blackstone, he announced to Agent Morrison. I represent Mrs. Whitmore. Not anymore? You don't, Isabella called out cheerfully. Richard, how lovely to see you again. The lawyer's face went pale. Isabella Rivera, I thought you were dead. Yes, that seems to be a common misconception. Isabella's smile could have melted titanium. I trust you'll be withdrawing from Mrs. Whitmore's case, given the rather glaring conflict of interest. What conflict of interest? Karen demanded. Richard, Blackstone looked like he was about to be sick. Mrs. Whitmore, I can't represent you in this matter. Why not? Isabella answered for him. Because Richard here has been my attorney for the past 15 years. He's the one who helped me disappear so convincingly, and he's the one who's been monitoring Elena's estate on my behalf. The revelation hit Karen like a physical blow. Even her own lawyer had been working for the other side. The retainer payments you've been making to Richard's firm, Isabella continued. They've been funding the investigation that just brought you down. Karen's scream of rage could probably be heard in the next county. She lunged toward Isabella with her nails extended like claws, but Scheherazade was faster. The camel stepped smoothly between them, her massive bulk creating an immovable barrier. Karen bounced off Scheherazade's side like a tennis ball hitting a brick wall, and went down hard in the mud for the second time. Agent Morrison shook her head with professional disgust. Ma'am, you just added assault to your charges.